The bride ran away, so the maid was forced to marry the prince. What if I told you that one day, almost 500 years ago, a royal bride vanished minutes before her wedding, that an altar stood empty while ambassadors from 3 kingdoms waited, that an orphan maid was torn from a convent and dressed in the bridal attire still warm from another woman's body, and that from this imposture, a love so true was born that it changed the destiny of an entire nation. This is the story of Inês de Souza, the girl no one saw grow up, but whom everyone would learn to revere. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Comment with your city, your country. I would love to know how many hearts, from how many corners of the world, will beat together on this journey. And if this story touches your soul, as I hope it will, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like. Every gesture helps these ancient narratives find new ears, new hearts. Year 1546, location, Lisbon, Portugal. During the reign of the Queen Regent, D. Catarina de Bragança, the great bell of the cathedral struck 9 times that August morning, and each chime seemed to carry the weight of an omen. Lisbon awoke under a sky of polished silver, the kind of light that precedes great storms or great events. In the royal palace, the great hall had been transformed into a wedding chapel overnight. Crimson carpets covered the cold stone floor. Beeswax candles, so many they looked like fallen stars, filled the air with a thick aroma of honey and sacred smoke. Prince D. Afonso de Bragança, 28 years old, with eyes the color of roasted chestnuts, waited before the altar with his hands clasped behind his back. His black velvet doublet, embroidered with gold thread, weighed on his shoulders like invisible armor. He did not love D. Leonor de Meneses. He knew this with the cold clarity of one who knows his own limits. But he had learned since he was a boy that love was a luxury for commoners. Princes married for alliances, not passions. The ambassadors had already taken their seats. The one from Florence, in his purple brocade robes, fanned himself with an ivory fan. The one from Toledo, austere in black and silver, kept his gaze fixed on the stained glass windows where colorful saints shed light upon the guests. The one from Vienna, fat and sweating, wiped his brow with a fine linen handkerchief. 30 minutes passed. The Queen Mother, D. Catarina de Bragança, majestic in her crimson gown that seemed made of contained embers, began to twist the amber rosary beads between her fingers. Each bead that slid was a prayer, or perhaps a contained curse. Archbishop D. Henrique, with his golden mitre and a crozier resting like a shepherd's staff between his bony fingers, cast restless glances toward the main doors. Then the messenger came. Bare feet on the carpets, a face as white as chalk, his breath ragged. He whispered something in the Queen Mother's ear. The silence that followed was the kind that precedes earthquakes. D. Catarina rose with a slowness that was pure, contained fury. Her steps echoed through the hall as she crossed to the bride's chambers. Afonso followed her. The door opened to a scene of abandonment. The wedding dress, a masterpiece of Bruges lace over ivory satin, embroidered with tiny pearls that had taken 6 months to sew, lay on the bed like a snake's skin left after shedding. On the rosewood vanity, among vials of rose and amber perfume, was a letter sealed with the Medicis crest. D. Catarina opened it with fingers trembling with rage. "Forgive me, Your Majesty, but I cannot be a gilded cage when my soul begs for open skies. I choose freedom even if it costs me everything." The handwriting was firm, final. Afonso read over his mother's shoulder and felt, for a fleeting moment, something that might have been envy. Leonor had chosen. He, a prince of the blood, had never had that prerogative. "The ambassadors," the Queen Mother whispered, and her voice was a sharp blade. "The agreement with the Medicis, the alliance with Castile, everything." She did not finish. She didn't have to. Afonso looked at the abandoned dress, that empty shell of others' dreams, and a question shot through his mind like an arrow. What does one do when the planned destiny unravels? The answer would come from where he least expected it, and it would change everything. Inês de Souza woke that morning, as she had woken every day for 12 years, to the sound of the matins bell calling the sisters to lauds. The convent of Our Lady of Piety smelled eternally of candle wax, olibanum incense, and dried lavender. They were scents that had become her very breath. She was 20, but she seemed to carry a much greater age in her eyes, the kind of old age that comes not from years, but from absences. An orphan from Coimbra, the daughter of a scribe and copyist who had traded his own daughter for peace, in the face of gambling debts when she was only 8. Inés still remembered the journey, her father not looking back. The hands of the Mother Superior, cold and dry as ancient parchment, closing over hers. No one officially taught her to read, but Inés had learned the way sparrows learn to fly, by watching, trying, falling, and trying again. She had watched her father hunched over manuscripts, illuminating capital letters with gold and pigments that looked like liquefied dreams. Later in the convent, she had hidden behind columns during the noble pupils' lessons, absorbing every word like dry earth absorbs rain. Now she worked in the laundry and the library. Her hands knew as much about scrubbing linens in stone tanks as they did about illuminating the margins of books of hours, with infinite patience. The embroidery she did in the hours stolen from sleep was so delicate it seemed woven by sacred spiders. She was invisible, and she had learned to love her invisibility like a protective cloak. Until Sister Francisca, her usually serene face transformed into a mask of urgency, found her among the sheets hung out to dry in the sun. "Inés, come now." There was no room for questions in that voice. In the convent courtyard, a black carriage was waiting. The golden crest on the door made Inés's heart leap. The intertwined lilies and swords of the House of Braganza. "Where?" she began. "I don't know." Sister Francisca cut her off, and there was fear in her eyes. Fear and something more. Pity, perhaps. But when the Braganzas call, maids do not ask. They go. Inés climbed into the carriage in her simple grey linen dress, her hands still damp from the laundry, her heart beating like a trapped bird. The velvet curtains closed. The outside world became streaks of light and shadow crossing her face as Lisbon slid by outside. She didn't know yet. She couldn't have known that her life, that small, silent life, was about to be devoured by something immensely larger. The royal palace was a universe of marble and gold that made Inés feel even more insignificant than an ant before a cathedral. She was led through corridors where tapestries depicted ancient battles, where the floor was so polished it reflected her frightened face like a pool of water. When the door to the chambers opened, 3 women were waiting for her. One held the wedding dress. "That dress." "Undress," ordered the oldest with a voice that allowed no hesitation. I don't understand." "You don't need to understand. You need to obey." The hands that undressed her were not gentle, but neither were they cruel. They were merely efficient, mechanical, as if preparing a lamb for sacrifice. The wedding dress slid over her thin body like cold water. The pearls were heavy. The lace itched. Satin shoes were placed on her calloused feet. Then the door opened again. The Queen Mother, Di Caterina de Braganza, entered like a contained storm. Her eyes swept over Inés from head to toe with the precision of someone evaluating cattle at the market. "She will do," she declared. "The veil will cover enough." "Your Majesty," Inés found her voice somewhere deep inside, that place where a shred of dignity still remained. What do you want from me?" Di Caterina drew closer, so close that Inés could smell the perfume of lilies and power that emanated from her. "The bride has fled. The ambassadors are waiting. The agreement is at risk. You are roughly the same height, the same build. With the veil, no one will know until it is too late." The world seemed to tilt beneath Inés's feet. You want me to? You will marry my son," the Queen said, and there was no kindness in those words. "No choice. The ceremony will be performed. The marriage, consummated in the eyes of the Church and the kingdoms. And then we shall see. But this is necessary." And so Inés de Souza, convent maid, orphan of a ruined scribe, was dragged to the great hall-turned chapel, where a prince awaited her, not knowing that the woman under the veil was not the one he expected. The veil was thick, white as a winter fog. She walked down the aisle between the gazes of ambassadors and nobles, each step an eternity. The archbishop began to recite the Latin words that would unite 2 souls. Inés heard her own breath caught in her chest. She felt Afonso take her hand. Strong, warm fingers. He whispered something, words of the ritual, ancient promises, but she could not hear them over the roaring of her own blood in her ears. The ring slid onto her finger, cold gold, intertwined lilies and swords. "I declare you husband and wife before God and these witnesses." The bells began to toll. 12 chimes that announced to all of Lisbon the prince was married. Except he wasn't. He had married a shadow, a deception. A maid who would not even have her own name, were it not for the stubbornness of a long-forgotten father. And as the guests applauded and the sun finally broke through the clouds outside, bathing the hall in a golden light that seemed a divine blessing, Inés felt tears dampen the veil. They were not tears of joy. They were tears of terror. The bridal chambers smelled of white roses and myrrh. Scented wax candles created dancing shadows on the walls, lined with tapestries depicting gardens of Eden. A massive bed, covered with damask quilts embroidered with silver thread, occupied the center of the room like a pagan altar. Inés was alone. The maids had withdrawn after dressing her in the bridal nightgown. linen so fine it was almost transparent, embroidered with lilies at the cuffs and neckline. Her hair had been let down, falling in brown waves over her shoulders. She was trembling. When the door opened and D. Afonso entered, Inez's heart nearly leaped out of her mouth. He had removed his formal doublet. He wore only a white linen shirt and dark trousers. His black hair was slightly disheveled, as if he had run his hands through it many times. He carried a goblet of wine in each hand. He approached. He offered one to her. "Drink," he said, and his voice was gentle. Tired but gentle. "It helps calm the nerves." Inez accepted with trembling hands. The wine was red, full-bodied with the taste of ripe plums and oak. It burned her throat. Afonso drank from his own goblet, without taking his eyes off her. And then, with a clarity that made her take a step back, he said, "You are not Leonor de Meneses." It was not a question. It was a certainty. The silence that followed was as thick as dark honey. Inez lowered her gaze to the polished wooden floor, to her bare feet that seemed so small, so inadequate for this place. She began, and her voice came out broken. "Look at me," Afonso requested, and there was something in his tone that made Inez obey. His brown eyes were deep, sad but not cruel. "Who are you?" And there, in that perfumed room where secrets were meant to be whispered only between lovers, Inez told the truth. "My name is Inez de Souza. I am an orphan from Coimbra. My father was a scribe. He was a scribe before the debts. He gave me to the convent of Our Lady of Piety when I was 8. I worked in the laundry and the library. I have nothing. I am nothing." Afonso drank more wine. He walked to the window, looking out at the sleeping Lisbon below, at the lights that flickered like scattered fireflies. "My mother," he said finally. "It was she who ordered this." It wasn't a question, but Inez nodded. "Leonor fled. She left the dress and a letter. I was brought here, dressed, placed under the veil, like a substitute." Afonso laughed. It was a bitter, humorless laugh. "A marriage based on a lie. How poetic!" He turned to her. "And now? What do we do now, Inez de Souza?" She had no answer. "The marriage was performed before the Archbishop," he continued, more to himself than to her, "before ambassadors from 3 kingdoms. In the eyes of the Church, in the eyes of God, you are my wife." "But I'm not," Inez whispered. "I'm not who you needed me to be." Afonso approached again. He stood so close she could see the small lines of fatigue around his eyes, the exact shape of his mouth. "No one is who others need them to be," he said softly. "Not even princes." And then, with a gentleness that surprised her more than any violence could have, he took her hand and kissed her fingers. "You will sleep here tonight. I will take the divan tomorrow. Tomorrow we will find a way to navigate this storm." Inez felt hot tears roll down her face. Why are you kind to me?" Afonso smiled. It was a sad but genuine smile. "Because we are both prisoners of this farce, Inez, and prisoners should have compassion for one another." That night, he slept on the divan near the window, covered only with a cloak. Inez lay on the immense bed, lost among sheets that smelled of lavender, listening to his soft breathing from across the room. And for the first time since she had been torn from the convent, she felt something other than fear. She felt a strange, impossible spark of hope. The first 5 days were like living in someone else's dream. Inez was lodged not in the main chambers, but in a smaller room in the east wing, a room still larger and more luxurious than anything she had ever known, with a canopy bed, a cedar chest, and a window overlooking the inner gardens. The official story created by the Queen Mother was simple and efficient. D. Leonor had suddenly fallen ill with a very high fever on the morning of the wedding. The ceremony had been held with a thick veil to protect the guests from contagion. The new princess consort was resting in separate quarters during her recovery. No one questioned it. One does not question queens. Inez spent her days like a caged bird that doesn't yet understand the door is locked. She illuminated manuscripts she found in the library, a huge 3-story room with stained glass windows that painted rainbows on the books. She embroidered to keep her hands busy and her mind quiet. She walked through the private chapel, kneeling before polychrome wooden saints who stared at her with glass eyes. But it was in the inner cloister that she found something akin to peace. The cloister was square, surrounded by carved stone arcades where climbing vines ascended like green hands reaching for the sky. In the center, a marble fountain sang its eternal song. Orange trees perfumed the air with white blossoms, so delicate they seemed made of dream foam. Rosemary grew in orderly beds, and when Inez rubbed the leaves between her fingers, the scent transported her far away, to no specific place, just away. It was there that Afonso found her on the afternoon of the 5th day. He emerged from the shadows of the arcades like an apparition. He wore simple clothes, a white shirt, a brown leather vest, linen trousers. No embroidery or silks. He seemed to want, like her, to disappear. "May I sit?" he asked, pointing to the carved stone bench near the fountain. Inez nodded, unable to find words. They sat in silence for a long time. The sound of the falling water was conversation enough. A bee landed on an orange blossom, collected its tribute, and flew away. "Do you come here often?" Afonso finally asked. "Every day," Inez replied. It's the only place I can breathe." He nodded as if he understood perfectly. "When I was a boy," he said, looking at the orange trees, "I ran away once. I was 8. I managed to get to the port. I was going to board a merchant ship, work as a cabin boy, sail to the Indies. What happened? The guards found me. My mother had the captain who had agreed to take me whipped." He smiled bitterly. "I learned that day that princes do not choose their destinies. They only fulfill them." Inez looked at her own hands, calloused from her work in the convent. "I didn't choose either," she said softly. "Neither of us chose this." "No," Afonso agreed, "but perhaps we can choose what we do with it." He turned to her then, and there was something different in his gaze. Curiosity, perhaps, or the beginning of something that did not yet have a name. "Tell me about yourself, Inez de Souza. Not the orphan, not the maid. You. Who are you when no one is looking?" And there, under the orange trees, with the afternoon sun filtering through the leaves and painting golden patches on the stone, Inez began to speak. She spoke of the father who had loved books more than his own daughter, of the convent sisters who had been her only family, of how she learned to read by hiding behind columns, of the manuscripts she illuminated with pigments she prepared herself, blue from lapis lazuli, red from cinnabar, gold from leaves beaten until they became stardust. Afonso listened, truly listened, not just waiting for his turn to speak. And when the Vespers bell rang, calling everyone to supper, neither of them stood up immediately, because something small, as fragile as a spring shoot, had sprouted between them, something that was not yet trust. But it was perhaps the beginning of it. September arrived with its misty mornings and golden afternoons. Lisbon smelled of ripe grapes and the sea. Inez began to create a routine within the gilded prison her life had become. She would rise with the sun, go to morning mass in the private chapel, spend her mornings in the library, and her afternoons in the cloister or embroidering in her room. Afonso came to see her with increasing frequency. Sometimes they brought books and read together. Other times they just walked through the gardens in companionable silence. He never touched her beyond offering his arm as they walked. He never pressed. And Inez slowly, like a flower unfolding petal by petal, began to feel less like a prisoner and more like something that didn't have a name yet. Until the first letter arrived. It was on her pillow when she returned from dinner, an envelope of expensive paper, sealed with black wax into which a lily had been impressed. The calligraphy of the address was feminine, educated, elegant. To the princess consort. Inez opened it with trembling fingers. "Soon everyone will know you are not who you pretend to be. Enjoy it while you can wear that crown of lies." No signature, no return address. Inez's heart raced. She read and reread the words until they blurred. Who knew? How did they know? And more importantly, what would they do with this knowledge? She hid the letter under her mattress and did not sleep that night. In the following days, she began to watch the glances at court more closely, the way certain ladies conversed in whispers that ceased when she passed, the smiles that did not reach their eyes. And then she noticed Di Violante de Castro, Afonso's cousin, 33 years old, a childless widow. She always wore black and purple, colors of perpetual mourning or contained ambition. Her eyes were a grayish-green like the sea before a storm. In them was a sharp, calculating intelligence. And in them there was something else, poorly disguised hatred. "It is remarkable," Violante said one afternoon passing Inez in the corridors, "how some people transform so suddenly, from a feverish invalid to a picture of health in a matter of days, almost miraculous." She did not wait for a reply. She just walked on, leaving a trail of gardenia perfume and venom. 10 days later the second letter arrived, more threatening, more specific. "The Royal Council must know the truth. The farce cannot be sustained. Soon everything will fall." This time Inez did not hesitate. She sought out Afonso. He was in his private chambers reading correspondence. When she entered without being announced, he looked up, surprised. "Inez, what?" She held out the letter. Afonso read it in silence. His face became a mask of stone. "How long?" "The first was 10 days ago. This one arrived today." He crumpled the paper with a force that made his knuckles turn white. "Violante," he said, and it wasn't a question. "I suspect so." Afonso stood up. He walked over to her. and for the first time since that wedding night, he took both of her hands in his. "Listen to me carefully, Inés de Souza. You are my wife before God and men. No anonymous letter, no whispering snake can change that. I will not allow it. But if they tell the council, let them tell." His voice was pure determination. "We will find a way. There is always a way." Inés looked at his hands enveloping hers. Strong hands, firm, hands that for the first time made her feel protected. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you defend me? I am nothing. I bring no alliances, no riches. I am just—" "You are my wife," he interrupted, and there was something new in his voice, something that sounded almost like conviction, and that is all that matters. That night Inés burned both letters in her room's fireplace. She watched the paper turn to ash, the threatening words transform into smoke that rose up the chimney and was lost in the Lisbon sky. But she knew the danger had not burned with them. It was just waiting for the right moment to strike. October arrived, wrapping Lisbon in morning fogs that only dissipated at midday. The leaves of the orange trees began to yellow at the tips. The air had that crispness that announces autumn, even in lands where winter is gentle. Inés was in the library when she heard the commotion. Raised voices in the corridors, hurried footsteps. That particular agitation that precedes great events. She ran down the stairs, her heart already anticipating disaster. In the main courtyard, a black carriage with the Menac's crest, rampant lions on a golden field, was parked. Servants ran back and forth. The Queen Mother, D. Caterina, stood at the main entrance, motionless as a pillar of salt, her face so pale she looked as if she had seen a ghost. And then she stepped out of the carriage, D. Leonor de Menezes. Her hair was as red as autumn fire, caught in elaborate braids. Her green eyes shone like cut emeralds. She wore a moss-green velvet gown with golden embroidery that caught the light. She was everything Inés was not, tall, proud, undeniably noble in every gesture. Her gaze met Inés's from across the courtyard. It was as if time had stopped. Leonor ascended the steps with the grace of someone walking on a stage. She made a perfect curtsy before the Queen Mother. "Your Majesty," she said, and her voice was as clear as crystal, "I beg your forgiveness for my sudden absence, but I return now ready to fulfill my duty." The silence that followed was the kind that precedes avalanches. D. Caterina regained her composure with a visible effort. "You arrived too late, Leonor de Menezes. My son has already married." "To an impostor," Leonor retorted, and there was steel in her softness. "Everyone knows. The whispers run through the halls. The woman under the veil was not me." Inés felt the ground turn to quicksand beneath her feet. At that moment Afonso appeared. He was coming from the stables, still in riding clothes, his hair tousled by the wind. He stopped in the middle of the courtyard when he saw Leonor. Something passed between them. Recognition, memory, but not love. It had never been love. "Day, Leonor," he said formally. "You are welcome as a guest, but not as a bride. That role has already been filled." Leonor looked at Inés for a long time. There was curiosity in that gaze, perhaps even respect, but also a deep sadness. "So be it," she said finally. "But we must talk, the three of us." She was lodged in the north wing of the palace as far as possible from the main chambers, a symbolic exile, but her presence transformed everything. The nobles divided into factions, those who supported the consummated marriage with Inés, those who considered Leonor the true intended, and those who were just waiting to see which way the power would swing. 3 days later, on a rainy afternoon that turned Lisbon into a blurred watercolor, Leonor sent a message to Inés. "Meet me in the library at dusk. I need to speak with you alone." Inés went, not out of courage, but because the cowardice of not going would be worse. The library was empty and silent. The rain drummed against the high windows. Leonor was waiting for her near the fireplace, where a low fire crackled. She had taken off her jewels and wore a simple dark green wool dress. She looked smaller like this, more human. "Sit," she requested, pointing to the chair opposite hers. Inés obeyed. For a long time they just looked at each other, two women trapped in the same impossible destiny by different paths. "You're afraid of me," Leonor said. It wasn't a question. "I am," Inés admitted. "You have every right to hate me." Leonor laughed. It was a joyless laugh. "I hate many things, Inés de Souza. The arranged marriage, the gilded cage, the way women are used as currency in the games of men." She leaned forward. "But I don't hate you. How could I? You're as much a victim as I am. Then why did you come back?" The question hung between them like smoke. Leonor looked at the flames. When she spoke, her voice was almost a whisper. "Because I discovered that running from fear is just finding another kind of prison. Because I spent 2 months hiding in convents and distant relatives' homes, And every day freedom tasted more bitter, because, she laughed bitterly, because we are all prisoners, Inez, inside or outside of palaces. The only difference is the size of the cell. Inez felt a strange thing, compassion. What do you want now? The truth. Leonor met her eyes. Do you love Afonso? The question cut like a sharp blade. Inez did not answer immediately. She thought of the days in the cloister, the conversations under the orange trees, the way Afonso had been looking at her lately, as if he truly saw her, not just the impossible situation she represented. I don't know, she said honestly, but I'm beginning to believe I could. Leonor nodded slowly. She stood up, walked to the window where the rain ran down like tears from the sky. He never looked at me like that, she said softly. Not once. It was duty for both of us, obligation. She turned around. Defend yourself, Inez de Souza. When the storm comes, and it will come, defend yourself with tooth and nail, because unlike me, you have something to fight for. And you? Inez asked. What will you do? Leonor smiled. It was a sad but true smile. I will try to find some form of freedom that does not require me to destroy other prisoners. She left then, leaving Inez alone with the dying fire and the rain that would not stop falling. And Inez understood something fundamental. Your enemies are not always who you expect them to be. Sometimes they are unlikely allies. The summons arrived 10 days after Leonor's return, parchment sealed with the royal crest, in the formal hand of the kingdom's secretary. Your presence is requested before the royal council, the 15th day of October, at the hour of terce. Afonso received an identical summons. When their eyes met at breakfast, they didn't need to speak. They both knew what it meant. The judgment had come. On the morning of the 15th, Inez dressed with care. She chose a navy blue wool dress, simple but well cut, with no jewelry other than the wedding ring that now felt as if it weighed a ton. She tied her hair in a simple braid. She wanted to appear dignified, not pretentious. The Royal Council Hall was imposing, a high ceiling with oak beams, the crests of all of Portugal's provinces on the walls, a long dark wood table where the men who decided the kingdom's fate sat. At the center, on a raised chair, sat the Queen Mother Di Catarina de Braganza, dressed in crimson as always, a small but significant crown on her dark hair. To her right, Di Rodrigo de Souza, Count of Linhares, with his greying beard and unforgiving eagle eyes. To her left, Di Martim de Albuquerque, a veteran diplomat who had served 3 kings. Archbishop Di Henrique occupied a seat of honor representing the word of God in earthly matters, and there were others, 8 councillors in all men, all powerful. Inez entered with Afonso. He offered her his arm and she accepted, grateful for the support. They were instructed to remain standing, like defendants. Di Rodrigo was the first to speak. His voice echoed through the hall like distant thunder. Prince de Afonso, you brought before God and men a woman who was not the one promised in matrimony. You entered into a union based on falsehood. The council demands an explanation. Afonso did not waver. My mother, the Queen Regent, made the decision she deemed necessary when Di Leonor abandoned her obligations. The ceremony was performed with all canonical formalities. The marriage is valid, but based on deceit, thundered Di Martim. The ambassadors were deceived. The alliances compromised. The alliances, Afonso said, his voice cutting through the air like a sword, depended on a woman who chose to flee. Leonor de Meneses consciously abandoned her position. A choice made is a destiny sealed. Archbishop Di Henrique raised a hand calling for silence. In the eyes of the church, his grave voice said, a consummated and blessed marriage is indissoluble. But this council must determine if there was consummation in fact, or merely an empty ceremony. Inez felt a blush creep up her neck. Afonso squeezed her hand discreetly. The marriage was consummated, he lied without hesitation. Inez de Souza is my wife in every sacred and legal sense. Di Catarina, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke. This farce was my responsibility, she said, and there was weariness in her voice. I made a decision in the heat of the moment to protect the kingdom, but now we face the consequences. And what consequences are those, Your Majesty? Asked Di Rodrigo. To accept that a convent maid with no lineage, no dowry, nothing but a forgotten name is the princess consort of Portugal. It was then that Afonso did what no one expected. He knelt. The entire hall held its breath. This woman, Afonso said, his voice carrying a conviction that silenced even Di Rodrigo, is not just my wife in the eyes of the law. She has earned something far rarer. She has earned my respect, my admiration, and yes, I dare say my true affection. He looked at each councillor one by one. Leonor was a political alliance. Inez is, he searched for the words, Inés is a choice of the heart, and I choose to defend this marriage with every fiber of my being. The silence was absolute. Inés felt tears burn her eyes, but she did not let them fall. Katerina stood up. All eyes turned to her. The marriage will remain valid, she decreed. My son has spoken, and I speak now. Inés de Sousa de Bragança is the princess consort of Portugal. This decision is irrevocable. Rodrigo opened his mouth to protest, but the Queen Mother raised her hand. Irrevocable, she repeated, and anyone who questions this decision will be questioning the authority of this crown. The council was dismissed amid murmurs and furtive glances. Some seemed satisfied, others clearly displeased, but no one dared to openly challenge. When they finally left the hall, Inés and Afonso walked in silence through the corridors until they reached the cloister. There, away from prying eyes, she finally spoke. "Why did you do that?" Afonso looked at the orange trees, at the singing fountain. "Because it was the truth," he said simply. Every word. And when he offered her his hand, not as an obligation but as an invitation, Inés took it, and she knew that something had changed between them. Something irreversible and precious, like the birth of stars. 15 days after the council, just as Inés was beginning to believe the storm had passed, the letter arrived. It was not anonymous this time. It came sealed with the Médicis crest and bore the signature of D. Leonor. "I request a public hearing before the court to present my case. It is my right as a noblewoman of Portugal." The news spread through the palace like wildfire. A public hearing meant nobles from all over the kingdom, important merchants, even foreign ambassadors who remained in Lisbon. It would be a trial in the eyes of all. Violante de Castro was the one who brought the summons to Inés personally, 3 days before the hearing. Her satisfaction was palpable. "It will be interesting," she said with a smile that did not reach her cold eyes, "to see how you defend yourself when all of Lisbon is watching." The night before the hearing, Afonso went to Inés's chambers. She was at the window, looking at the city illuminated by thousands of candles and torches. "I can cancel this," he said. "One word from me and—" "No," Inés interrupted, turning around. "Don't do that. If I am to be a princess, if I am to bear this title, I need to face this. I need to show that I am not just an imposter who accepted someone else's role." "You were never an imposter," Afonso said vehemently. "You were a victim of circumstances." "Perhaps," Inés conceded, "but tomorrow I will be a fighter." The Hall of Crests was packed when Inés entered. Every seat was taken. People stood along the sides, the eyes of hundreds fixed on her as she walked down the central aisle. She wore a pale blue satin gown, simple but elegant, with discreet embroidery she had done herself, intertwined lilies and stars. Her hair was done in a crown braid, her only jewel the wedding ring. Leonor was already there, seated in a special chair to the right of the Queen Mother's empty throne. She wore emerald velvet, the Médicis jewels glittering, a ruby necklace, pearl earrings. She looked like a queen in exile. The Queen Mother, Katerina, made her entrance. Everyone rose. The silence was total. "This hearing has been requested by Leonor de Médicis," the herald announced. "Let her state her case." Leonor stood with practiced grace. When she spoke, her voice reached every corner of the hall. "Your Majesty, nobles of Portugal, I have come before you to acknowledge my error. I fled my obligations like a coward. I abandoned Prince Afonso at the altar. For this I ask for public forgiveness." A murmur went through the crowd. "But," Leonor continued, "I have also come to request that this council recognize that the marriage performed in my absence was based on a falsehood. The woman under the veil was not me. She was a substitute, chosen in haste with no lineage, no preparation to be a princess consort." The murmurs grew louder. Inés remained motionless, her face serene even as her heart pounded. "I request," Leonor finished, "that the fraudulent marriage be annulled and that a new ceremony be held, this time with the true bride." The silence that followed was as thick as fog. Then, before anyone could speak, Inés stood up. "May I speak, Your Majesty?" Katerina hesitated, then nodded. Inés walked to the center of the hall. All eyes were on her. She felt the weight of those gazes like physical chains. "Leonor speaks the truth about many things," she began, her voice steadier than she expected. "I am not noble. I have no illustrious lineage. I am the orphan of a scribe, a convent maid." She paused, took a deep breath. "But there is something Leonor does not know." She pulled a folded envelope from her pocket. "This is the second letter she left. Not the one found with the dress, but another, a more revealing one." The entire hall leaned forward. Inés read aloud, "I cannot give love where there is only duty. I cannot be a wife where there is only obligation. May Afonso find someone who can love him with a free heart. For mine I discovered too late. belongs to another path. The impact was immediate. Leonor turned pale. Where? Where did you get that? It was in the book of hours you left in your chambers, Inez said gently, marking a passage about the freedom of the soul. She turned to the audience. I do not justify the initial deception. It was a mistake born of desperation. But from this deception something true was born. Afonso and I, she searched for her words, we did not begin with love, but we are building it, stone by stone. Day by day, Afonso then stood up. He walked to Inez and before the entire court took her hand. This woman, he said in a voice that echoed off the walls, has more nobility in one finger than many have in entire lineages. She has earned not only my respect but my soul. And I say before God and men, she is my wife, today and always. He looked at Leonor. You chose your path. I honor that choice. But do not ask me to undo mine. Leonor remained standing for a long moment. Her face was an unreadable mask. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. It was a sad but genuine smile. You are right, she said softly. I chose. And I cannot ask you to undo what has become true. She curtsied to Afonso, then to Inez. I withdraw my request. May you be happy. Archbishop D. Henrique rose. The Church recognizes this marriage as valid and indissoluble in the eyes of God, he declared. Let no one separate what the Lord has joined. And so, before all of Lisbon, the decision was sealed. When Inez and Afonso left the hall hand in hand, the bells of the cathedral began to ring. And the people who had gathered outside applauded, because stories of improbable love always touch the hearts of those who also dream of the impossible. 4 days after the hearing, Inez was in the cloister when Leonor appeared. There were no maids, no guards, just 2 women who had been unlikely enemies and were now, what? They did not yet know. Leonor wore simple grey linen, no jewels. She seemed smaller like this, more vulnerable. Her red hair was loose, blowing lightly in the autumn breeze that smelled of dry leaves and rosemary. May I sit? She asked. Inez gestured to the stone bench near the fountain. They sat in silence for a long time. The sound of the falling water was the only dialogue. The letter, Leonor said finally. How did you know it was there? I didn't, Inez admitted. I found it by chance. I was reading the book of hours a few weeks ago. It fell out from between the pages. And you kept it, to use against me. No, Inez corrected her gently. I kept it because I understood your pain. And I thought that maybe one day you would need someone to understand it. Leonor looked at her then, truly looked. Why did you do that? Why did you show compassion when you had every reason to hate me? Inez thought carefully before answering. Because we were both prisoners of the same system. You chose to escape the prison. I was forced into it, but the bars were the same. Leonor laughed. It was a humorless laugh, but not bitter. Do you know what I witnessed at the hearing? She said. I saw Afonso look at you in a way he never looked at me, with choice, with will, and I realized I was asking to undo something real because I was afraid to face my own reality. And what is your reality? Leonor looked at the sky, where white clouds drifted slowly. There is a man, the captain of a merchant ship. I met him during my months of flight. He didn't know who I was. He just saw me. Not my name, not my lineage. Me. Inez felt compassion tighten in her chest. And what will you do? I am going to the convent of Santa Clara, Leonor said. Not out of obligation, but by choice. There I will have peace to think, to decide. My family will accept that it is better to have a daughter in a convent than a fugitive one. She turned to Inez. But I came to warn you of something. Violante never forgives a defeat. She wanted Afonso for herself, not for love, but for power. You humiliated her before the entire court. She will not forget. I am aware, Inez said. Then be vigilant. Leonor stood up. And Inez? Take care of him. Afonso is too good for this world of snakes. She leaned in and surprisingly hugged Inez briefly. It was a quick, almost awkward embrace, but it was genuine. Thank you, she whispered, for showing me there was another way. And then she was gone, crossing the arcades, a figure in grey disappearing among stone shadows. Inez knew with absolute certainty that she would never see her again, but that this meeting, this unlikely reconciliation, had marked her forever. 3 days later, the news arrived. D. Violante de Castro had retired to her estates in Tras os Montes, officially to take care of matters on her lands, but everyone knew it was a temporary retreat. Snakes do not disappear. They just wait for the right moment to strike again. But for now there was peace, as fragile as crystal, as precious as dew. Peace enough for something beautiful to continue growing. December arrived with its cold mornings and skies of polished steel. Lisbon prepared for Christmas. Wreaths of pine and holly adorned the doors. The smell of gingerbread and mulled wine filled the streets. It was Afonso who suggested it. They were in the cloister, as always, under the orange trees that were now heavy with golden fruit. He took her hand in his, a gesture that had become natural between them in recent weeks. "Our marriage began with a lie," he said. "How about we start over? This time with truth?" Inés didn't understand immediately. "Let's renew our vows," Afonso explained. "Not as an obligation, but as a choice. Before God, yes, but mainly before ourselves." Inés's heart tightened. "Are you sure there's still time to—" "For what?" he interrupted gently. "To choose lineage over heart, power over peace? No, Inés. I choose you. I choose this thing we have built, stone by stone, silence by silence." And then, for the first time, he kissed her. It was a timid, almost reverent kiss. His lips barely touched hers, as light as a butterfly's wings, but it carried the weight of entire worlds. When they parted, Inés had tears in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, let's renew our vows." The ceremony was set for the morning of December 20th in the royal chapel. It would be intimate, only 15 people. No pomp, no ambassadors, no political games. Just two souls choosing each other. Inés spent weeks embroidering her own dress, simple ivory linen, but on the sleeves and neckline she created an entire garden of intertwined lilies and stars, using silk threads in the colors of spring. Every stitch was a prayer, every flower a wish. For her hair she used the only heirloom she possessed, a blue silk ribbon that had belonged to her mother. It was faded, the edges a little worn, but when Sister Francisca, who had been specially invited, braided it into her hair, Inés felt that the mother she had never known was there, somehow bearing witness. Afonso also dressed simply. A night blue, velvet doublet without excessive embroidery, white linen trousers, soft leather boots. He looked more like himself this way, not a prince, just a man. The royal chapel was decorated with pine branches and white candles, the aroma of incense mixed with the scent of fresh pine. Rays of winter sun streamed through the stained glass windows, painting rainbows on the marble floor. The guests were few but significant. The Queen Mother di Catarina, who for the first time looked at Inés with something akin to approval, Archbishop di Henrique, a teary-eyed Sister Francisca, a few nobles who had genuinely supported the union, and palace servants whom Inés knew by name. When Inés entered, Afonso turned, and what she saw in his eyes made her heart nearly burst. Admiration, affection, and yes, perhaps the beginning of what would one day be a complete love. There was no veil this time. They walked toward each other with uncovered faces, direct gazes, the naked truth between them. The Archbishop began, "We are here to witness the renewal of vows between Dean Afonso de Bragança and Dean Inés de Sousa de Bragança. May every word spoken today be written not only in the records of the Church, but in the hearts of those who pronounce them." Afonso took Inés's hands. His voice was firm when he spoke. "Inés, when I met you, I met a prisoner like myself. But in getting to know you, I discovered a freedom I never imagined possible. I promise you honor, not out of duty, but devotion. I promise you companionship, not out of obligation, but choice. And I promise that my affection for you will grow like a river, slow but steady, until it becomes an ocean." Inés took a deep breath. When she spoke, her voice trembled only at the beginning. "Afonso, I came to you by the hands of chance and necessity, but I stay by the hand of my own heart. I promise you loyalty, not because princes demand it, but because you deserve it. I promise you companionship in silences and in words, and I promise that my love for you will be renewed with each dawn, like dew upon petals." They exchanged rings again. This time they were rings each had chosen. His for her, simple gold engraved with lilies, hers for him, silver with tiny stars. "I declare you again husband and wife," said the Archbishop. "May God bless this union born of adversity and blossomed in truth." The kiss was different this time, more confident, more real. When they left the chapel, they discovered the news had spread. The squares around the palace were full of people, merchants, artisans, laundresses, fishermen, the people of Lisbon. And when Inés and Afonso appeared at the window, the applause was deafening, because Inés had become something unexpected, a symbol for the humble, for the forgotten, for all those who never dreamed that someone like them could touch the sky. That night, for the first time, when Afonso took her in his arms, there were no lies between them. Only two hearts choosing each other, freely, truly, finally. The spring of 1547 arrived with its cloak of wildflowers and promises. Lisbon woke early, full of renewed energy, and Inez discovered she had her own way of contributing to the kingdom that was now, surprisingly, hers. 4 times a week she returned to the convent of Our Lady of Piety, but not as a maid, as a benefactor and a teacher, with Afonso's blessing and funds from her own dowry, which the Queen Mother had finally granted. Recognizing that the new princess needed means, Inez established something revolutionary, a school for orphan girls and the daughters of artisans. "If I learned to read hiding behind columns," she told Afonso when she presented the idea, "imagine what these girls could do if they were given a real opportunity." The school operated in an abandoned wing of the convent. Inez and Afonso invested in its renovation. Windows were opened to let in light, desks and benches were built, and parchment and quills were bought in quantity. Sister Francisca, who had always believed in Inez, became a dedicated assistant. On the first day, 5 girls showed up, timid, with hands calloused from work, their eyes wide with hope and fear. Inez greeted them at the door. "Welcome," she said simply. "Here you will learn to read, to write, to illuminate manuscripts, to embroider, and perhaps most importantly, to believe that your dreams have value." She taught them as she had been taught, with patience, repetition, and encouragement, but also with gentle discipline. She showed them how to prepare pigments, blue from lapis lazuli ground into a fine powder, red from cochineal dissolved in gum arabic, gold from gold leaf beaten until almost transparent. She taught them to form capital letters so beautiful they looked like small works of art, to embroider patterns that told stories, to read not just words, but the meanings between the lines. After 3 months, there were 20 girls. After 6, 40. The news spread through Lisbon. The princess consort, who had been a maid, was teaching maids to be more than maids. In the palace, Inez also changed things, subtly but significantly. She learned the name of every servant. She asked about their families, their struggles. When the cook fell ill, Inez personally brought her chicken broth and aromatic oils. When the gardener's son needed treatment the family couldn't afford, she paid for it discreetly. The minor nobles, those who had always been on the margins of power, began to see her not as a threat or an anomaly, but as an ally, someone who understood what it was to be invisible. And, strangely, surprisingly, Inez discovered she was good at this, at being a princess not of the kind who wore crowns and gave orders, but of the kind who built bridges between separate worlds. Afonso watched with growing pride. "You are changing this kingdom," he said one night as they walked through the cloister under the stars. "I'm just doing what I can," Inez replied. "No." He stopped, turned her to face him. "You are doing what matters. The difference is immense." And when he kissed her there under the orange trees and the stars, Inez knew that what they felt for each other finally had a name: love. Not the love of troubadours and songs, but a love built on shared silences, on common purposes, on the daily choices to stay and build together. The best kind of love, the kind that lasts. Spring was at its peak when Afonso found her in the cloister one afternoon, when the air smelled of jasmine and earth wet from a recent rain. He held a letter in his hands and wore an expression that Inez could not decipher. Anxiety? Excitement? Both? "I have news," he said, sitting beside her on the stone bench. Inez marked the page of the book she was reading, a treatise on agriculture she was studying to improve the convent's gardens. "Good or bad? That depends on how you see it." He opened the letter. "My father, King D. Duarte III." Inez felt her heart clench. The king had been ill for years, a progressive paralysis that kept him in his private chambers. She had never met him. "Is he—" "No, not dead," Afonso smiled. "Better, much better. The doctors say it's a miracle, but he has regained movement in his legs. He can walk with a cane, and he wishes to meet you." "Meet me?" Inez's voice came out thin. "Why?" "Because he has heard about your school, about what you're doing. And because—" Afonso took her hand. "He wants to organize an official ceremony. Not a wedding, but a coronation. To recognize you on your own merit, not just as my wife." The world seemed to tilt. "Afonso, I don't deserve—" "You do," he interrupted firmly. "More than anyone. And there's more." He turned the letter over. "He wants to invest royal funds in the school, to make it an official institution, the Royal School of Arts and Letters. the first in the kingdom dedicated to the education of girls of all classes. Tears burned in Inez's eyes. This is more than I could have ever dreamed. Dream bigger, Afonso said softly, because the entire kingdom is watching. And what you build here will be a model for other places. They sat there for a long time, hands intertwined, plans being woven in companionable silence. And then, that April night when they were in the chambers they now truly shared, Inez told him the other secret she had been keeping for weeks. "Afonso," she said, her voice trembling, "there is something I need to tell you." He turned, worried. "Are you ill? Did something happen?" "No, it's not that." She took his hand, placed it on her still flat belly. I am going to have a child." The silence was absolute. Then, slowly, a smile spread across Afonso's face. A smile that started small and grew until it lit up his entire face. "A child," he repeated, amazed. "Our child. A child," Inez said softly, "who will unite royal blood with the heart of the people, who will grow up knowing that value comes not from birth but from character." Afonso pulled her into his arms. He held her as if she were a fragile treasure. "Do you love me?" he asked then, his voice muffled against her hair. Inez pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. "I do," she said simply. "I don't know when it started. Maybe that first day in the cloister. Maybe when we renewed our vows. Maybe it has been growing so slowly I didn't notice until it was complete. But I love you. With everything I am. I love you too," he replied. "More than kingdoms. More than crowns. More than anything this world can offer." And when they kissed, it was the kiss of people who had traveled a long journey to get there. From the improbable to the impossible to the inevitable. A love that had begun as a farce and had become the truest thing either of them had ever known. May arrived dressed in gold and green, all of Lisbon in bloom. The day chosen for the ceremony was clear, with a deep blue sky that seemed to have been washed by God's own hand. The Hall of Crests was transformed. Tapestries from all of Portugal's provinces hung from the walls. Wildflowers, not garden roses but daisies and lavender from the countryside, filled large clay vases. It was elegant, but it maintained a humility that Inez appreciated. King D. Duarte III entered, leaning on an oak cane. He was a man of 60, his hair and beard completely white, but his eyes were still alive, intelligent. When he saw Inez, he smiled. "So this is the maid who became a princess and changed my kingdom," he said, his voice hoarse but strong. Inez curtsied deeply. "Your Majesty, rise, child." He held out his hand. Inez took it, helping him to sit on the throne. "I want to thank you. Thank me. But you gave me back my son," the king said. "When he was to marry Leonor, he was fulfilling a duty. When he chose you, he was following his heart. And a man who follows his heart governs better than one who follows only politics." The ceremony began. A new crown had been forged especially for Inez, not of pure gold and exotic jewels, but of gold from Portuguese mines, with gems from every province. Amethyst from Trás-os-Montes, tourmaline from Alentejo, quartz from Beira. It was all of Portugal condensed into a circle of light. Archbishop D. Henrique led the blessing, but it was King D. Duarte III who placed the crown upon Inez's head. "Inez de Sousa de Bragança," he proclaimed in a voice that reached every corner of the hall. "Princess of Portugal, not by birth but by her own virtue, future mother of princes, educator of children, a bridge between the palace and the people. May your reign be remembered not for its pomp but for its purpose." The applause that followed made the windows vibrate. Outside, in the squares, in the alleys, in the markets, all of Lisbon celebrated, because Inez represented something the people had never dared to hope for, that the impossible could happen, that girls from convents could wear crowns, that merit could triumph over birth. When the ceremony ended and the guests dispersed for the banquet, Afonso found Inez on the balcony overlooking the city. She still had the crown on her head, but she was barefoot as she often was in her chambers. The feet that had scrubbed linens in stone tanks now rested on palace marble. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I am terrified," she admitted, and amazed, and pregnant, and confused, and happy. All at the same time, Afonso laughed. He pulled her to him, one hand on her belly where a new life was growing. "When I take the throne," he said, "my first edict will be to guarantee an education for all the kingdom's orphans. Boys and girls. Your school will be the model. Our kingdom," Inez corrected, "will be one where birth does not determine destiny, where merit is worth more than a name, where every child has a chance to dream." "It's a big dream," Afonso observed. "All good dreams are," Inez replied. They stood there as the sun set over Lisbon, painting the Tagus River in gold and crimson. From the palace came the sounds of music and celebration. From the streets, the voices of people singing, and Inez de Souza, orphan of Coimbra, convent maid, improbable princess, future mother, felt a peace she had never imagined possible, because she had discovered that true power did not come from crowns or thrones. It came from hearts that choose love over fear, from lives that build bridges over walls, from dreams that refuse to die, even when the world says they are impossible. She was Inês de Souza de Bragança, and her story was just beginning.